Have you ever imagined what would happen if a calm, unassuming hotel maid suddenly unleashed her elite military training to protect innocent people? In this story, that's exactly what happens. A quiet New York hotel becomes the center of a tense standoff when a ruthless biker gang tries to seize the property for their own dark purposes. But little do these criminals know, they're about to go head-to-head with someone who has all the skills of a Delta Force operative hidden beneath a modest uniform. Curious how one determined woman holds her ground against an entire gang? Or how the terrified staff bands together to defend their home away from home? You'll have to listen to the full tale to find out the unexpected twists and turns, plus the epic final showdown. If you enjoy gripping stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We have plenty more thrilling adventures on the way. New York City was a place of frenetic energy, with neon signs lighting up endless streets and restless crowds swirling day and night. Yet even within this ceaseless motion, there were pockets of stillness, corners of the metropolis where the hum of traffic and the glow of advertisements felt distant. Nestled at the edge of Manhattan's Lower East Side stood the Graceland Hotel, a boutique lodging with fading wallpaper and time-worn carpets that whispered stories of a bygone era. Tourists rarely set foot there, but the establishment had its loyal patrons, traveling businessmen seeking anonymity, cross-country truckers desperate for a few hours of rest, and the occasional wanderer in search of a modest bed for the night. The hotel's unassuming facade belied a quiet sanctuary from the city's relentless pace. Among the staff working tirelessly to keep the Graceland afloat was Evelyn Carter, a hotel maid in her late 30s. She moved through the halls with the practiced grace of someone who'd long grown accustomed to being overlooked. Passing guests barely noticed her. She was neither too young nor too old, neither particularly striking nor plain. Her dark hair was always neatly tied back, and her uniform was impeccably pressed, though well past its prime. She greeted each day with stoic determination, content to slip beneath the radar and let life carry on around her. Despite her humble appearance, Evelyn's eyes held a quiet intensity, hinting at something far more complex than the average observer would suspect. Every once in a while, a momentary glimpse of her reflexes would betray her innate athleticism. A precariously balanced tray of dishes would slide off a cart and she'd catch it with lightning-quick precision, eliciting passing remarks from the hotel cook or the curious stares of guests who happened to witness these flashes of skill. She would always downplay such incidents with a shy shrug or a hurried apology. Rumors among the staff suggested she hadn't always been a maid. One or two employees speculated that Evelyn had once worked for a private security firm. Her posture was too upright, her gaze too measured to belong to someone who had spent her entire life changing bed linens and vacuuming corridors. But in a place like the Graceland, personal histories remained personal. There was an unspoken agreement among the ragtag group of employees. Mind your job, mind your own business, and everything would run smoothly. The hotel's manager, Mr. Dolan, was the kind of person who appreciated stability over questions. He had asked for Evelyn's resume years ago, but she'd only provided the basics: a high school diploma, a history of short-term jobs, and an eagerness to work. He'd hired her without further inquiry. Over time, she had become something like an anchor for the Graceland. In her calm, methodical manner, she handled everything from unruly guests to sudden plumbing disasters, with a level of composure rarely seen in hospitality newcomers. No one realized Evelyn Carter had once served in the U.S. Army's elite Delta Force. Fewer still knew she'd spent years mastering advanced combat tactics, infiltration skills, and specialized weaponry. She quietly chose a profession that would let her blend in. Overhearing occasional city chatter, she kept her head down, reminding herself that the life she had left behind was best kept a distant memory. Little did she suspect that fate was about to thrust her back into the fray, and that the unremarkable solace of the Graceland Hotel would soon be shattered by a gang of bikers with dangerous ambitions. Long before the Graceland Hotel ever became her refuge, Evelyn's life had been defined by discipline and service. She grew up in a small Midwestern town, raised by grandparents who insisted on equal parts moral guidance and physical self-reliance. From a young age, she was adept at fixing fences, hunting in the woods, and patching up the family's battered pickup truck. When she turned 18, She enlisted in the Army to both honor her grandfather's legacy — he was a retired serviceman — and to find a purpose she felt was calling her. Little did she know that her steadfast nature and remarkable aptitude for strategy would quickly set her apart. During basic training, Evelyn consistently outperformed many of her peers, whether in marksmanship, endurance drills, or problem-solving exercises. Her instructors noted her heightened situational awareness, a trait they believed might lend itself to specialized operations. She volunteered for every advanced course offered, often spending her few free hours poring over field manuals and practicing maneuvers in the barracks courtyard. Her achievements did not go unnoticed. A series of commendations paved the way for selection into a classified program. Though she spoke of it to almost no one, that program turned out to be the gateway to Delta Force, one of the most elite counterterrorism and special missions units in the world. For several years, Evelyn was deployed to conflict zones she never dared to name out loud. Her responsibilities ranged from recon missions in hostile territories to safeguarding high-value assets in volatile regions. She gained a reputation for calm under fire, an ability to sift through chaos and focus on the objective. Her superiors counted on her to plan and execute high-stakes operations, trusting that she would carry them out with minimal errors. She lost teammates along the way, friends she considered family, making her all too aware of the brutality that lurked in humanity's darkest corners. Yet she pressed on, driven by a sense of duty she could barely articulate. Eventually, the weight of those operations began to take its toll. She witnessed atrocities that haunted her, nights where she found no solace in routine or training. After her final overseas deployment, she knew she'd reached a breaking point. The thought of returning to civilian life was both a comfort and a terror. She craved normalcy, but feared she had left too many pieces of herself scattered on distant battlefields. It was then that she decided to resign her commission and quietly slip away from the world of special forces. Through a series of carefully chosen steps, transferring her bank accounts, changing her name's official usage to match her birth certificate, and relocating far from her hometown, Evelyn managed to leave little trace of her former identity. New York City was the logical hideaway. In a place swarming with millions, anonymity was guaranteed, so long as one kept a low profile. She arrived with a duffel bag of clothes, a handful of personal mementos, and a lifetime of secrets. There was little direction in her plan. She simply walked the streets until she saw a help wanted sign in the window of the Graceland Hotel. Mr. Dolan interviewed her, asked a few cursory questions, and she answered them with practiced vagueness. The pay was barely enough to scrape by, but to Evelyn, the job promised one invaluable commodity: obscurity. Looking back, she realized she had believed she could outrun her past indefinitely. Yet destiny often has other ideas, and soon enough, the city's underbelly would conspire to knock on her door once more. At the Graceland, days often blurred together, a predictable cycle of making beds, scrubbing bathroom tiles, and restocking linen closets. Evelyn found comfort in the routine. Each chore was a measured, methodical task that required focus but never threatened her with the traumas of her past. In the bustling mornings, she would greet the night shift security guard with a nod, then head to the staff lounge for a quick cup of coffee before starting her rounds. By midday, the corridors came alive with a cacophony of voices, families squabbling over sightseeing plans, business people barking orders into their phones. While some guests were polite, others were dismissive or downright rude, but Evelyn handled them all with quiet patience. She kept an ear out for odd murmurs in the lobby. Sometimes she'd overhear remarks about biker gangs looking to expand into New York's underbelly. News reports flashed stories of violent standoffs, but Manhattan was considered too congested and heavily policed for such groups to thrive openly. One gang, the Iron Serpents, was rumored to be on the lookout for properties to use as safe houses. Evelyn brushed it off, assuming the Graceland, somewhat dingy and off the radar, wouldn't draw their attention. Not everyone was so sure. The assistant manager, Marjorie, a sharp-eyed gossip, kept recounting neighborhood whispers. Local shopkeepers complaining of extortion, bartenders noting leather-clad newcomers asking too many questions, and a few coordinated petty thefts. Evelyn listened politely, offering little more than a soft, "I see." She preferred to remain unnoticed, showing no signs of any special insight into security matters. Things changed one night when a battered motorcycle pulled up near the hotel's side entrance. Its rider, wearing a black leather vest and tinted aviators, disappeared inside for a few minutes before roaring away, leaving the stench of exhaust in the alley. Marjorie claimed she saw him hand an envelope to a night porter, who hurried off without a word. Rumors flew among the staff: hush money, a bribe, a threat. No one knew. Mr. Dolan insisted it was none of our concern, but tension thickened. Over the next week, the neighborhood chatter grew louder. Local papers mentioned small fires, vandalism, and an uptick in bar fights, actions that sounded like intimidation tactics. Evelyn saw how her coworkers began looking over their shoulders, locking doors earlier, and triple-checking security cameras. Even so, the Graceland moved on with its usual routine. After all, this was New York, a city where danger lurked in many forms. Still, the sight of that lone biker had lodged itself in Evelyn's mind. She found herself scanning the alley outside, noticing fresh scuff marks on the pavement and a stray cigarette butt that hadn't been there before. Though she tried to maintain her low profile, old instincts flickered within her, reminders of a time when she was trained to see threats before they materialized. She had no proof the Iron Serpents were involved, but a nagging feeling told her the Graceland wasn't immune to the city's undercurrents. And in the days to come, those undercurrents would prove stronger than anyone could have imagined. Despite the rising unease, Mr. Dolan tried to keep business as usual, reminding his staff that rumors about biker gangs and back alley deals were nothing new in a city of millions. He urged everyone to focus on their assigned duties and not let urban legends spook them. But even he couldn't ignore the subtle changes taking root in the neighborhood. More strangers began loitering outside the hotel at odd hours, their motorcycles parked haphazardly on the curb. Occasionally, they exchanged brief words with guests before vanishing into the night. Some guests complained of feeling unsafe, and Dolan was forced to hire an additional security guard for the late shift. Evelyn observed all of this with a calm, inscrutable gaze. In another life, she would have documented these incidents, quietly gathering intel to piece together the bigger picture. Now she fought the urge to intervene. She was a maid, not a soldier. Each morning, she reminded herself that a single misstep could attract the wrong kind of attention, both from the bikers and from any old contacts who might still be searching for her. So she continued to scrub floors, change sheets, and avoid eye contact with the growing number of leather-clad men prowling the vicinity. Then came the night that shattered the Graceland's uneasy equilibrium. The hotel had a modest restaurant on the ground floor, mostly serving simple breakfast for early risers. One evening, a small group of bikers strolled in just before closing time. They looked around dismissively, barking orders for coffee and sandwiches from the tired, overworked waiter. Their jackets bore the Iron Serpents emblem, a coiled snake with an iron chain clenched in its jaws. One of them, a stocky man with a patch over his left eye, eyed the decor as though it were beneath him. Another, tall and lanky, fiddled with a cigarette he never bothered to light. Marjorie, who was covering the front desk that evening, tried to remain professional as she explained the kitchen was closing soon. The men scoffed, demanding to speak to the manager. Mr. Dolan emerged from his office, clearly unsettled, yet attempting to project authority. The bikers muttered something about acquiring the property for an expansion, stating that certain arrangements had been made with the night porter. Dolan, flushing with a mix of confusion and anger, denied any knowledge of such dealings. A heated exchange ensued, drawing the attention of a handful of guests in the lobby who either watched in fascinated horror or quickly grabbed their things and retreated to their rooms. Evelyn, who had been finishing a round of cleaning near the back corridors, appeared at the edge of the restaurant area just in time to see the confrontation escalate. One of the bikers reached forward and grabbed Dolan by the collar, demanding respect. Without thinking, Evelyn's muscles tensed, and she instinctively stepped forward. But she caught herself at the last second, reminding herself that intervening would only escalate matters and risk exposing the very part of her past she sought to bury. Instead, she moved out of sight and hovered near the doorway, ready to act if the situation spiraled out of control. Eventually, the men let go of Dolan with a sneer, tossing a few crumpled bills onto the table before leaving as abruptly as they arrived. Evelyn, heart pounding, took a moment to steady herself, aware that the quiet days at the Graceland were truly over. In the wake of that tense encounter, the staff tried to restore a sense of normalcy. Breakfast service resumed the next morning, with guests shuffling and bleary-eyed for coffee and pastries. Dolan walked around with a stiff smile, greeting everyone in an exaggeratedly cheerful tone. Marjorie discreetly checked the lobby windows every time a motorcycle engine revved in the distance. A palpable unease clung to the air, as though the building itself held its breath, waiting for the next disruption. Evelyn continued her tasks, wordlessly assisting housekeepers with extra loads and stepping in to handle any menial chore that might spare others a few minutes of rest. She noticed how frayed her coworkers' nerves were. Some jumped at the slightest sound, while others spoke in hushed tones about finding new jobs before things got worse. But no one left. The Graceland, flawed as it was, still felt like home to many of them. Paychecks aside, there was a sense of camaraderie, an unspoken understanding that they were in this together. Yet behind the scenes, Evelyn felt the stirrings of her old mindset. She started surveying exits, memorizing faces of people who lingered too long in the lobby, and mentally mapping the hotel's blind spots. Late at night, while others slept, she'd walk the corridors, testing door locks and checking security cameras, doing her best not to arouse suspicion. She wasn't sure why she bothered. It was no longer her job to protect anything or anyone. Perhaps old habits die hard, or maybe something in her recognized that running wouldn't solve this problem. If the iron serpents intended to sink their claws into the Graceland, simply walking away felt too much like cowardice. One afternoon, while gathering fresh sheets from the storage room, she overheard a pair of guests chatting. They mentioned spotting multiple motorcycles parked in a nearby alley, the riders poring over what looked like building blueprints. The guests laughed it off, dismissing the bikers as overzealous hobbyists. But Evelyn's instincts screamed otherwise. She recalled how her Delta Force unit used to meticulously plan every angle of an operation, studying layouts to maximize advantage. The memory made her stomach twist. She didn't want to be right, but it all pointed to a carefully orchestrated move. Later that day, Evelyn found Mr. Dolan pacing in his office. He looked up at her with bloodshot eyes. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I'm not sure how to handle these men if they come back. They keep hinting about buying the hotel, threatening us if we don't cooperate. I don't want to get the police involved yet. I don't know who's on their payroll, but this can't go on." She stood there, torn between the urge to stay hidden and the impulse to help. She had no desire to relive her military life, but neither could she watch innocents be harassed by criminals. I don't know what to tell you," she stammered, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe better security, or a private consultant?" Dolan nodded weakly. "I'll see what I can do," he murmured, as though grasping for any lifeline offered. Evelyn left the room, a swirl of conflicting emotions in her chest. She realized that stepping back might not be an option anymore. Whether she liked it or not, her past was calling her back into action. That same evening, the hotel's restaurant was closed for a deep cleaning, leaving the lobby unusually quiet. Evelyn took the opportunity to mop floors and wipe down reception counters, her mind replaying Dolan's desperate plea for guidance. Would she really stand by while a group of thugs bullied her makeshift family at the Graceland? Her heart argued that she should do something, but her head reminded her that standing out could invite unwelcome scrutiny. If the Iron Serpents discovered her real background, or if her old comrades recognized her face in a police file, her life would unravel, and so would the fragile peace she'd built. Suddenly, the front doors slid open with a hiss. 4 bikers wearing the Iron Serpents patch strode inside, their heavy boots echoing on the tiled floor. One was the stocky man with the eye patch, another was the lanky smoker, and the other 2 were new faces, grim expressions set on weathered features. Without hesitation, they approached the reception desk where Marjorie usually stood, but tonight Marjorie was absent, having left early due to a sudden illness. Instead, a timid young clerk named Adam was on duty, visibly trembling as the men towered over him. Eye Patch leaned in, planting both hands on the desk. "We've got business with Dolan," he rasped. Adam stammered, "He's not here. He left a while ago." The biker's single exposed eye gleamed with irritation. "Tell him to stop ducking us," he snapped. "Time's running out for him to play nice." The tall, lanky biker flicked his unlit cigarette between his fingers, an intimidating gesture that needed no words. Adam could only nod, his throat too dry to form a coherent response. Evelyn kept her back turned, continuing to mop as if oblivious to the confrontation. She was just a maid, nothing more, but her ears honed in on every syllable. The new arrivals muttered plans to return later, with more of their crew in tow. They mentioned clearing out the property if Dolan wouldn't sign. One even made an offhand remark about how easy it would be to intimidate the daytime staff. Her grip tightened on the mop handle. They were threatening to harm innocent people, all for some twisted real estate power play. With a final sneer, the bikers departed, leaving Adam wide-eyed and visibly shaking. Evelyn set down her mop and hurried over, offering a glass of water. "You okay?" she asked softly. Adam swallowed hard and shook his head. No, no, I'm not. I don't get paid enough for this." She couldn't help but nod in understanding. None of them did, but the danger was real, and it was closing in fast. That night, Evelyn lay awake in her small, rented room on the hotel's top floor. As the city lights painted streaks across the ceiling, she contemplated her next move. Running away would be the simplest option. She could vanish just like she had before. But if she left, Dolan, Adam, Marjorie, and everyone else would be at the mercy of the iron serpents. And deep down, she knew she couldn't allow that. Her conscience wouldn't let her. Slowly, she rose from the bed and opened the old footlocker at the back of her closet. Inside lay reminders of a previous existence, a pair of heavy-duty combat boots, a worn tactical vest, and a dog-eared journal of field notes. She traced her fingers over the vest, recalling late-night raids and desert patrols. The woman she had been was still there, buried under years of forced anonymity. With a steadying breath, Evelyn closed the footlocker, her choice made. Evelyn woke to a dull ache in her shoulders, a lingering souvenir of sleepless nights and tense muscles. Across the worn carpet of her modest room, the old footlocker remained closed, but it felt like an invitation she couldn't ignore. Dawn light seeped through the thin curtains, illuminating a space that was almost painfully plain. No pictures on the walls, no personal knickknacks on the shelves. The only sign of her long-buried identity was hidden in that locker. She'd chosen this Spartan existence deliberately, hoping it would grant her freedom from the shadows of her past. Yet now, in the quiet moments before the hotel stirred to life, she felt those shadows creeping back. The events of the previous evening played over and over in her mind like a stuck record. The bikers storming into the lobby, their open threats, Adam's terror-stricken face. She'd been on the verge of intervening more than once, but a single miscalculation could have cost innocent lives, or exposed her own. Standing at the window, she surveyed the alley below. No telltale glint of chrome or idle motor, no group of leather-clad figures skulking at the curb. For the moment, the coast was clear, but her instincts told her this was only a lull before the storm. She dressed for work, deliberately choosing her most unassuming uniform. She had never considered the hotel's drab outfit a disguise before, but now it felt like a form of camouflage, a tactical advantage against enemies who might judge her at a glance and see nothing but a harmless maid. The hallway echoed with the usual morning bustle, housekeepers prepping their carts, the cook rattling pans in the kitchen, and the faint hum of a vacuum somewhere down the corridor. It was all so ordinary, yet beneath the routine churned an undercurrent of anxiety. Before heading to her duties, she stopped by the manager's office. Dolan was slumped over his desk, his tie loosened and dark crescents under his eyes. He looked up wearily, managing a faint smile. "Morning, Evelyn, boss," he said, voice heavy with fatigue. "Everything quiet last night?" She offered a small nod. "As far as I know," she replied. Neither acknowledged the tension that hung in the air, but it was there, undeniable. A flicker of relief passed over Dolan's features. "Let's hope it stays that way," he murmured, though his tone hinted he expected anything but peace. Emerging into the lobby, she saw Adam trying to appear confident while greeting a pair of newly arrived guests. The young clerk looked marginally steadier than last night, though his posture remained stiff. When he met her eyes, she gave him a reassuring nod, a silent promise that if the bikers returned, he wouldn't be left alone to face them. She moved on, collecting her cleaning supplies and pushing her cart toward the elevator. It struck her that protecting the staff and guests had become her mission by default, whether or not she wore a uniform with a flag on the sleeve. The knowledge both reassured and unsettled her. Though she'd walked away from the military life, the sense of duty still resided within her, woven so tightly into her identity that she couldn't disentangle it even if she tried. By mid-morning, the Gracelands routine had fully taken hold. Guests filing in and out for meetings or sightseeing, housekeepers alternating between floors, kitchen staff prepping lunch supplies. On the surface, it was business as usual, but Evelyn sensed a shared vigilance among her colleagues. People spoke in hushed voices, and any unfamiliar face that wandered into the lobby drew prolonged, nervous stares. Even the old doorman, Greg, who normally joked about the weather or the Yankees, stood a little straighter, occasionally peering toward the street with narrowed eyes. Evelyn wove through the corridors, ensuring each vacant room was neat and ready for the next occupant. As she folded towels, she replayed in her head every snippet of conversation she had overheard, the bikers referencing building plans, threats about clearing out the property, claims of a deal made with the now absent night porter. She wondered if the porter had been bribed or blackmailed, or if perhaps he was an unwilling accomplice to something more sinister. She remembered how, in her Delta Force days, gathering intel was often half the battle. Knowing your enemy's motivations, resources, and potential weaknesses gave you a decisive edge. In the Graceland's case, she was working blind. She didn't have official files, satellite imagery, or a team of specialists at her disposal. All she had was her training, a few scattered rumors, and a growing awareness that the Iron Serpents weren't just common thugs on a weekend rampage. Their actions suggested a coordinated plan, likely tied to expanding their territory within the city's underworld. The idea that they might systematically target small, financially struggling properties for takeover was both plausible and terrifying. As she turned a corner, she nearly collided with Marjorie, who was bustling past with a stack of fresh linens. "Sorry," Marjorie exclaimed, her eyes darting around even as she apologized. Clearly, the tension was eating at her. Evelyn gently guided her aside. "You all right?" she asked. Marjorie pursed her lips. "Just jumpy. I heard from one of the bellhops that there were bikers loitering around the loading dock earlier. They didn't come inside, but it's like they're marking their territory, you know." Evelyn nodded, her expression grim. "We'll get through this," she offered, though she wasn't entirely sure how. To gather information and stay discreet, Evelyn used her break to slip outside, ostensibly to grab a coffee at the deli next door. Once beyond the hotel's doors, she circled around the block, taking note of the alleyways and parked vehicles. She spotted no immediate threats, but she did notice a black SUV with tinted windows lingering at the far end of the street. Something about its presence set her nerves on edge. No one got out, no one went in, it just idled there. She mentally cataloged the license plate and made a quick mental note of any distinctive dents or scratches. These small details might matter later. Returning to the Graceland, coffee in hand, she caught sight of Mr. Dolan conferring with a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit. From his tense body language, Dolan appeared to be explaining the recent trouble. The man nodded gravely before stepping away, phone in hand. Evelyn guessed he might be some form of legal counsel or a contact who could offer advice on handling the threats. However, the resigned look on Dolan's face suggested any help might be too little, too late. As she walked past, their eyes met briefly, and she couldn't help but sense the silent plea behind his polite nod. It was as if he were begging her, or anyone, to do something more tangible than just hope the bikers lost interest. That afternoon, Evelyn found herself restocking supplies in a storage closet on the 5th floor. Under normal circumstances, she would focus on the immediate tasks, counting mini shampoo bottles, checking for enough toilet paper. But today, her mind was elsewhere. The memory of the black SUV and the biker's cryptic remarks gnawed at her. She needed more information, and she needed it fast. After propping the closet door open, she pulled out her phone. Accessing the internet had its risks if she wasn't careful. She had spent years ensuring no digital breadcrumbs would lead back to her special operations past. Still, she could conduct basic searches for local news, arrests involving biker gangs, and any open real estate disputes in the neighborhood. To avoid raising suspicion, she used a privacy-focused browser, methodically typing in keywords while half listening for footsteps in the hallway. Her heart skipped a beat when she stumbled across an article linking the Iron Serpents to a string of suspicious property takeovers in upstate regions. The pattern was chilling: small motels, diners, and even a truck stop had been strong-armed into selling for meager sums. Local authorities, often underfunded or infiltrated by corruption, offered scant protection. The article hinted that the group was looking to expand into the city, where their influence could yield far greater profits. Although the details were fuzzy, it aligned with what she was witnessing at the Graceland. Closing the browser, she slipped her phone back into her pocket. She stepped out of the closet, taking care to hide any sign of her research, and nearly tripped over a cleaning cart left outside one of the guest rooms. Inside that room, she heard the faint hum of a television. The occupant had left the door ajar, perhaps only stepping out for ice. Evelyn took a quick glance and recognized one of the frequent guests, an older salesman who often left news channels running for background noise. At that moment, a newscaster spoke about a recent spate of local arsons. Though no group had claimed responsibility, many believed organized crime was behind it. Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine. Arson was a favored tool among gangs looking to convince property owners to sell. Refocusing on her duties, she spent the next hour methodically cleaning rooms, making sure to stay alert. She noticed small details she might have overlooked before. A door handle that seemed slightly loose, a partially obstructed security camera in the stairwell. Each new detail sharpened her sense that the Graceland had vulnerabilities just waiting to be exploited by anyone with ill intentions. In the back of her mind, she began drafting a mental blueprint of how to secure the building, where a guard should be posted, how to reinforce certain doors, how to position makeshift barricades if needed. It was second nature to her, a vestige of the rigorous planning skills she had honed in her military years. A few colleagues greeted her with polite smiles, and she returned the gesture, masking her inner turmoil. As the day stretched on, her plan formed in increments. She would quietly take stock of the hotel's weaknesses, gather any intel she could about the Iron Serpents, and be ready if or when the gang made its next move. Evelyn knew she couldn't single-handedly stand against an entire biker crew if they came in full force, but knowledge and strategy could offset the bikers' brute strength. More importantly, she sensed she might not be alone. Although they were scared, her coworkers were decent, loyal people. If she could earn their trust without revealing too much of herself, they might stand a fighting chance. Late in the day, as she finished her shift, Evelyn made her way to the staff lounge. The room was small, just a battered sofa, a couple of chairs around a chipped table, and a fluorescent light that buzzed faintly overhead. Usually the space was a sanctuary for employees to decompress, but tonight it crackled with tension. Marjorie was there, sipping a cup of lukewarm tea. Adam sat in a corner, legs jiggling anxiously, while Greg the doorman peered out of the lounge's tiny window at the street below. A hush fell as Evelyn entered. She nodded in greeting and perched on the edge of a chair. Adam broke the silence. "Did you hear about the break-in down the block? A convenience store got trashed last night. People are saying it was a message from some biker gang." The clerk's voice wobbled, and Marjorie placed a hand on his shoulder, offering quiet support. Greg cleared his throat. "I've been keeping an eye out all day. Saw a few suspicious types ride by. They didn't stop, but it feels like they're sizing us up." His voice was roughened by decades of city living, but it carried a note of real concern. Used to be a time you could just call the cops, but these days you never know who's on the take. Marjorie nodded solemnly. "Mr. Dolan's been hinting that the hotel can't afford big legal battles or an elaborate security upgrade. And with the owners basically letting him run the place alone, I doubt there's much budget to spare." She cast a sideways glance at Evelyn. "I just hope we have some kind of plan." Evelyn felt the weight of their eyes on her, a swirl of conflicting emotions stirring inside. She realized that her coworkers sensed she had some hidden depth. She had never shown any extraordinary skills outright, but perhaps her calm demeanor in crises and those few accidental displays of reflex were enough for them to guess she wasn't just a run-of-the-mill housekeeper. Still, she couldn't confirm their suspicions outright. The last thing she wanted was to draw attention if anyone outside the room was listening. She chose her words carefully. "I think we need to stay vigilant, keep track of every unusual person who comes by, note any strange phone calls, that sort of thing. If they're really planning something, patterns will emerge." She didn't mention that she'd already started a mental log of all these details, from suspicious vehicles to questionable deliveries. Instead, she framed it as a group effort. We should communicate more. If anyone sees anything off, tell the rest of us right away. Marjorie exhaled, looking relieved to have some semblance of a strategy. Greg nodded, though he still appeared unsettled, and Adam managed a thin smile. It was a start, an informal alliance of people who wanted to protect the only home away from home they had. Rising to her feet, Evelyn made an excuse about needing rest. She left the lounge feeling a heavy mixture of responsibility and anxiety. With each passing day, her peaceful facade was cracking. The others looked to her for guidance, and she felt compelled to rise to the occasion. But was it enough to stand up to the Iron Serpents? The following morning, the Graceland's lobby was unexpectedly busy, with a few tour groups checking in and a convention in town that filled rooms at a brisk pace. For a moment, the heightened occupancy offered a sense of normalcy. Guests chattering happily, luggage rolling across the tiled floor, and bellhops rushing to keep up with demands. But beneath the surface, Evelyn could practically feel the tension humming. She wondered if the increased foot traffic might deter the bikers from making a scene, or if it would simply present more opportunities for them to hide in plain sight. Around noon, she passed by the front desk, where she overheard a conversation between Mr. Dolan and a stern-faced woman in a sharp business suit. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have any more suites available," Dolan was saying. The woman insisted she had a reservation, brandishing a smartphone. Evelyn glanced at the screen. It displayed some travel booking app. Dolan apologized profusely, offering a standard room at a reduced rate. The woman, clearly displeased, nodded curtly and stalked off, phone still in hand. Not unusual for a busy day, Evelyn thought. Yet the encounter left a nagging impression she couldn't shake. Something about the way the woman carried herself felt more deliberate, like she was scouting rather than just staying. Shortly after, one of the bellhops hurried over to Evelyn, breathless and agitated. "We've got a situation outside," he whispered. "Some bikers are loitering by the service entrance, demanding to speak with Dolan or the boss." Evelyn's pulse quickened. She grabbed a rag and a spray bottle, trying to maintain the appearance of a maid going about her routine. Together, they made their way to the service corridor, which led to a side door used for laundry deliveries and trash disposal. From behind a slightly ajar door, Evelyn peeked out. 3 men stood there, 2 wearing the Iron Serpent's emblem on their jackets, and a third, bulkier figure with no visible patches but an air of authority about him. Their motorcycles were parked a few feet away, engines still warm. One of them lit a cigarette, exhaling a cloud of smoke that mixed with the pungent odor of garbage from the nearby dumpsters. "Where's Dolan?" the large man growled, his voice carrying into the corridor. "We need an answer on that paperwork now." Evelyn's grip tightened on the spray bottle. Paperwork? Could they mean a forced contract or some phony deal to get Dolan to sign away ownership? The men looked agitated, ready to lash out. The smaller one spat on the ground. "That old guy better not be wasting our time," he warned. "We got places to be." She weighed her options. Should she confront them, try to talk them down, or simply observe? For a moment, she considered stepping forward, but she stopped herself. She needed to gauge their intentions first. After a tense minute, the large man barked a string of curses and motioned for the others to follow him back to their bikes. The roar of engines reverberated off the brick walls, and soon they disappeared, leaving only the acrid smell of exhaust. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was clear they were getting impatient. The next time they showed up, they might not leave so peacefully. The bellhop wiped sweat from his brow. "This is getting scary," he muttered. "Dolan needs to call the cops." Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, but inwardly she was seething. Calling the police might help, or it might backfire if the Iron Serpents had contacts on the force. She knew from experience that some problems required more direct intervention, and with each passing day, it seemed more likely that she would have to provide exactly that. Later that afternoon, the hotel's internet station, a small desk in a corner of the lobby, was vacant. Evelyn seized the opportunity to do some deeper digging. She positioned herself to appear like any other staff member tidying up the area, but in reality, she was discreetly connecting to a secure site. The library quiet corner of the lobby and the hum of passing guests provided a low-level cover for her actions. Typing rapidly, she accessed an old, rarely used email account. She debated her next move. Contacting a trusted former comrade from her Delta Force days could be risky. There was no telling if they were still active duty, retired, or if they harbored resentment for her abrupt departure. Worse yet, if the email was intercepted, or if that person had turned into a chain of command stooge, Evelyn's cover would be blown. Still, she needed intel, someone with ties to law enforcement or security who could provide insights into biker gang structures or black market property deals. She composed a brief, cryptic message. Old friend, I'm in NYC, dealing with an organized group that wants a property. They may have inside connections. Could use advice on the best approach to mitigate. Remember our time in the desert? If you have any leads, let me know. Check the usual channels. E. After hitting send, she immediately cleared the browser history and logged out, taking care to erase any trace of her presence on the public terminal. Her heart pounded as she walked away, half expecting a hand on her shoulder. But no one stopped her, and the lobby continued humming with its daily swirl of guests. She spent the rest of the day on edge, suspecting every ring of her phone might signal a response, or a warning that her old life had caught up with her. By evening, there was no reply. She told herself it was too soon to expect an answer, but worry gnawed at her anyway. If no help arrived, or if her message had been compromised, she'd be on her own. That night, she ventured into the city under the guise of running errands. Riding a crowded subway train, she observed the faces around her. Weary commuters, chatty friends heading out for dinner, the occasional tourist studying a subway map. It was a typical New York crowd, except for one man wearing a black leather vest partially hidden beneath a jacket. He was tall with a freshly shaved head. Their eyes met, and Evelyn felt a spark of recognition. She couldn't be sure, but he resembled the lanky biker who had visited the Graceland. Although his vest lacked any gang insignia at a glance, she noted the faint outline where a patch might have been removed. She exited at the next stop, heart racing, and took a circuitous route through side streets to lose any tail. She stopped by a hardware store to purchase a few items: heavy-duty locks, a flashlight, and a small toolkit. On the surface, these could be chalked up to typical city life, but she knew each piece was part of her contingency plan to fortify the hotel's weak points, if it came to that. By the time she arrived back at the Graceland, it was past midnight, the corridors quiet except for the muffled hum of a vacuum. She slipped the items into her room, careful not to attract attention. Crossing to the window, she peeked outside. Once again, she thought she saw the black SUV idling at the end of the street, though it might have been her imagination. Exhaustion weighed on her, but sleep felt miles away. Everything was converging toward a point of no return. She just couldn't pinpoint when the final standoff would occur. If her old contact didn't reply in time, she would have to rely solely on her training and the fragile alliance she'd formed with the staff. A sliver of doubt crept in. Had she lost too much of herself to lead a successful defense? Or would the muscle memory, the instincts, and the iron will forged in battle resurface the moment she needed them most? Early the next morning, Evelyn was making her rounds when Mr. Dolan called her into his office. She found him pacing in front of his cluttered desk, which was strewn with paperwork and half-empty coffee cups. He gestured for her to close the door. When she did, he began speaking in a low, urgent tone. "Evelyn, I need to ask you something," he said, his eyes flicking to a folder on the desk that bore the hotel's letterhead. She waited quietly, bracing herself for questions about her background. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "These bikers are pushing hard for us to sell," he explained, tapping the folder. "It's a kind of buyout agreement, but the terms are ridiculous. The owners want me to finalize it, but I suspect they've been threatened behind the scenes. They refuse to pick up my calls now. I'm stuck. I don't have the authority to sign away the hotel, but I also can't outright refuse these guys." He exhaled, looking completely drained. Evelyn studied the tension lines on his face, noticing new wrinkles that had formed in the last few days. "I'm sorry," she offered, her voice sincere. "It's not your fault." He nodded but pressed on, voice trembling slightly. "I hate to ask this, but I've seen how you handle stressful situations. You're always so calm. Have you done this kind of thing before? Security or—" He paused, clearly wary of stepping over personal boundaries. "You don't strike me as just a hotel maid." A spike of adrenaline raced through her. Part of her wanted to deny everything, to feign ignorance and maintain her facade. But the look in Dolan's eyes was one of desperation. He needed someone to rely on. If she brushed him off, he might make a rash decision or trust the wrong person, sealing the hotel's fate. She measured her words carefully, her heart pounding. I've had some experience with high-pressure environments, she conceded, not specifying what those environments were. I'm not an expert, but I can handle myself. Dolan nodded, relief and curiosity mingling on his face. That's good enough for me, he replied. Look, I don't expect you to play the hero, but maybe you can help us prepare. I'm talking about some basic safety measures, a plan in case things go south. I can't pay you anything extra, but she raised a hand to stop him. I understand. I'll do what I can. A flood of conflicting emotions coursed through her as she spoke. Pride at being trusted, guilt at having hidden her past, and fear that once she committed to this path, there would be no turning back. Before she could overthink her decision, he thrust a set of papers into her hands. Security logs, old building schematics, outdated insurance paperwork. This is all I have, Dolan said, shrugging apologetically. I'm not even sure it's up to date, but maybe it'll help. Evelyn thanked him quietly, tucking the documents under her arm. As she left, she noticed a fleeting glimmer of hope in his eyes. It was as if he believed she could conjure a miracle from those dusty pages. Alone in the corridor, she glanced at the schematic, identifying possible points of entry and structural vulnerabilities. Her old training kicked in almost involuntarily. If the gang tried to force a large-scale entry, they'd likely target the loading dock or the side entrance. The main doors were too public, especially in broad daylight. She also noted potential choke points, narrow hallways that could be secured or used to funnel intruders. Step by step, a plan began to materialize. She had spent years running from this part of herself, but now it was time to harness it for a worthy cause. That evening, after completing her cleaning duties, Evelyn retreated to her room with the schematics and security logs. She spread them out on her small desk, an old lamp casting a warm glow across the pages. She used colored markers to note strategic spots, doors that needed reinforcing, camera angles that left blind spots, and alternative escape routes for guests and staff. If she were back in her Delta Force days, she would have a specialized team, advanced surveillance gear, and a chain of command to consult. Here, she only had her wits and a handful of coworkers, people untrained in combat, some even fearful of confrontation. Yet she wasn't entirely alone. The memory of the hardware store visit nudged her. She pulled out the locks, flashlight, and toolkit she'd purchased, laying them alongside her notes. With a little improvisation, she could strengthen a few critical doors. The flashlight might help if power was cut, and the toolkit contained basic but potentially invaluable items if she needed to rig a makeshift barrier or bypass a jammed lock. Every small advantage mattered. A soft knock startled her out of her concentration. Hastily covering the schematics, she opened the door to find Adam standing there looking uneasy. I just wanted to see if you needed anything, he stammered. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Is everything okay? She asked, motioning for him to come inside. He hesitated before stepping over the threshold. Adam glanced around, clearly noting the documents scattered on her desk. Dolan said you might be helping us with a safety plan, he said, his voice tinged with relief. I'm no fighter, but I want to help however I can. Evelyn studied his anxious expression. He was young, maybe early 20s, and seemed caught between fear and the desire to stand up for the place he considered a second home. Despite her reservations about revealing too much, she decided to trust him with a small piece of the puzzle. She led him to the desk and showed him the annotated schematic. Look here, she said, pointing at the loading dock entrance. If they come in force, this is likely where they'd enter. We need to reinforce this door. I have some locks and tools, but I could use someone to help me install them without raising suspicion. Adam nodded vigorously. I can do that. I'm in and out of that area all day. Nobody would think twice about me tinkering around with a lock. They spent the next half hour discussing which doors could be quietly secured and how to hide their modifications. She explained the importance of leaving some entrances subtly fortified, but still passable for everyday use. Adam asked questions, growing more confident with each answer. By the time they wrapped up, he looked almost enthusiastic, relieved to have a tangible action he could take. Before leaving, he paused at the door. Evelyn, I know there's more to you than housekeeping. I won't pry, but thank you for doing this. She offered a small smile, a rare flicker of warmth. We're in this together, she replied, gently closing the door behind him. Alone again, she leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. She felt a pang of guilt for hiding the full extent of her training, but it was necessary for everyone's safety, including her own. If word got out that a former Delta Force operative was stationed at the Graceland, the hotel might become an even bigger target. For now, discretion was her best weapon, next to vigilance and cunning. Just when Evelyn thought the day's surprises were over, her phone buzzed with an incoming email notification. A single ping that made her heart leap. She quickly locked her room door, then opened the message. The sender was an old friend from her Delta Force days, one of the few people she still trusted. He went by Romer, a code name from their shared missions. The email was brief, filled with subtle references only someone with their background would understand. Got your note. Iron Serpents are known for infiltration. Heard rumors they have ties to a retired cop named Lasky who helps them navigate legal channels. Suggest you watch your local precinct. Keep a low profile. They can turn law enforcement against you. Remember the desert tactic. Sometimes a feint is better than a direct fight. We'll pass along any further intel if I find it. Evelyn reread the message twice. The mention of a retired cop named Lasky was troubling. If the Iron Serpents had a well-connected law enforcement figure on their payroll, calling the police could indeed backfire. Worse, that could explain the subtle intimidation tactics, why they felt emboldened enough to threaten Dolan without fearing immediate legal consequences. She also recalled her friend's caution about using deception or misdirection as a strategy. In the desert, they had sometimes lured threats away from vulnerable positions, attacking from unexpected angles. Could a similar tactic work here? Cautiously, she composed a reply, making sure to keep her language cryptic in case anyone was monitoring. Appreciate the tip. We'll watch for friendly fire. Setting up a minimal front. Might try to redirect them if they push too hard. Thanks, E. She sent it off, then immediately closed the email app and cleared her browsing data. She couldn't afford to leave any trail that might lead back to Romer or herself. The revelation about Lasky weighed heavily on her mind. Even if Dolan contacted the police, there was a chance they'd get stonewalled or sabotaged from the inside. This meant Evelyn's plan to fortify the Graceland had to be airtight. They needed to rely on themselves, maybe even sow a bit of confusion among the bikers. If the Iron Serpents thought the hotel was an easy target, a brutal storming might be imminent. But if they suspected a trap or found disinformation seated among their sources, they might hesitate. Sliding the phone into her pocket, she slumped onto the edge of her bed. The enormity of the situation loomed before her. She was alone, yet not entirely. There was Dolan, Adam, Marjorie, Greg, and a handful of other staff members who would defend their livelihood if push came to shove. None were trained soldiers, but maybe, just maybe, that collective effort could be marshaled into a credible defense. She closed her eyes, recalling Romer's words. Sometimes a feint is better than a direct fight. If she could orchestrate a scenario where the bikers doubted their own advantage, it might buy the hotel enough time to find a more permanent solution, like a legal loophole or an external ally who wasn't corrupted. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, she couldn't help but revisit those old Delta Force missions in her dreams. The scenes shifted between arid landscapes and dusty compounds, where a small team accomplished feats that seemed impossible. She awoke with a start in the early hours, a newfound determination coursing through her veins. She wasn't that soldier anymore, but she wasn't helpless either. If the Iron Serpents wanted to fight, they would soon learn that underestimating the Graceland's quiet maid was their gravest mistake. In the days that followed, Evelyn coordinated a discreet network among the hotel staff. Marjorie monitored guest registrations, keeping an eye out for suspicious individuals booking rooms under fake names. Greg, the doorman, took it upon himself to note every motorcycle that lingered too close, even memorizing certain plates. Adam and Evelyn spent their off hours making low-profile enhancements to the building's defenses, replacing flimsy locks, applying reinforced plates to vulnerable doors, and placing wedge stops in strategic locations that could slow down an intruder. These tasks had to be performed under the guise of routine maintenance. Dolan would schedule a lock repair in the system, allowing Evelyn and Adam to work without raising eyebrows. They kept meticulous notes on which areas were secured and which still required attention. In a small storeroom behind the laundry facilities, Evelyn began stashing supplies that could be useful in a crisis. Flashlights, bottled water, first aid kits, extra batteries, and even a few makeshift melee weapons like broom handles, sharpened at one end. It wasn't quite an armory, but in a pinch, it might be the edge they needed. Meanwhile, Dolan tried to maintain the facade of normal hotel operations. He attended to the usual managerial headaches, late check-ins, billing disputes, occasional leaks from old pipes. Yet stress carved deeper lines into his face each time the phone rang unexpectedly or a shadow passed under the lobby's fluorescent lights. Tension pulsed through the staff like an electrical current, setting everyone on edge. One evening, Evelyn decided to take a calculated risk. During a lull in her duties, she slipped into Mr. Dolan's office. "We should talk about a contingency plan," she said, easing the door shut. Dolan looked up from his paperwork, exhaustion etched across his features. "What kind of plan?" he asked warily. Evelyn took a breath. "Worst case scenario, if the Iron Serpents come in force, we need a way to evacuate guests safely and stall the bikers long enough for help to arrive, assuming we can find legitimate law enforcement backup." Dolan nodded slowly. "I'm listening." She laid out her ideas, tempered by her military experience, yet vague enough not to reveal her true past. They discussed setting up a system for quietly alerting guests, an evacuation code delivered in plain language like, "We have an issue on floor 2, please relocate to the lounge," where staff would guide them to an exit. They also brainstormed using fire alarms or other building systems to create distractions. Dolan looked uneasy, but he agreed to keep these measures in mind. The very act of planning for violence unsettled him, but desperation left little choice. After their conversation, Dolan passed her a printed email from the hotel's absentee owners. It was short and curt, demanding an update on the potential sale. Reading between the lines, Evelyn could sense they were being coerced by the Iron Serpents as well. Her eyes narrowed. The gang's reach seemed to extend far beyond the Graceland, ensnaring those who were supposed to hold real power. She handed the page back to Dolan, feeling a surge of protectiveness for the people who had become her community. No matter how dire it got, she wasn't about to let these bikers seize control without a fight. That night, she returned to her room to revise her notes and check her email once more. No new messages from Romer, which was both disappointing and expected. Setting her phone aside, she meticulously reviewed everything she'd learned so far, looking for patterns or overlooked details. The plan was coming together piece by piece, though it was still far from foolproof. She knew the Iron Serpents could strike at any moment, under the cover of darkness or even in broad daylight. Whenever that moment arrived, the Graceland needed to be ready. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Shortly before dawn, on a day when the Graceland's occupancy was unusually high, a shrill noise cut through the hotel's early morning hush. Evelyn, who had been double-checking vacant rooms for housekeeping needs, froze in place, adrenaline flooding her veins. It wasn't a fire alarm or a security alert. Rather, it sounded like a motorcycle engine revving aggressively right outside the main entrance. She bolted toward the lobby, where a few bleary-eyed guests stood gawking at the glass doors. Two powerful bikes idled just beyond the threshold, their headlights slicing through the dim pre-dawn light. A third bike was parked near the curb. Three Iron Serpents dismounted, scanning the lobby through the glass. Among them was Eye Patch, the stocky enforcer who had grabbed Dolan by the collar days ago. Another was the tall, lanky smoker, though he was minus a cigarette this time. The third was an unfamiliar presence, a woman with a shaved head, a cold gleam in her eyes, and a sidearm holstered at her belt. Evelyn positioned herself partly behind a pillar, straining to hear. The bikers exchanged terse words, then Eye Patch yanked the door open with more force than necessary. Mr. Dolan, who had just emerged from his office, went pale at the sight of them. "We need to talk," Eye Patch snarled. "Now." Dolan's voice wavered. "Let's keep this civil, gentlemen and lady," he said, eyeing the woman's holster nervously. The trio entered the lobby, boots echoing on the tiles. A handful of guests backed away, uncertain whether to flee or keep watching. Evelyn noticed Adam sliding quietly toward the reception desk, likely ready to press the silent alarm or discreetly call for help. But then she remembered Lasky, the retired cop rumored to be in the gang's pocket. If the local precinct was compromised, the call might do more harm than good. A tense exchange followed. Eye Patch tossed a folder at Dolan's feet, demanding signatures. The woman with the shaved head glared around the lobby, hand resting near her holster. The tall biker took a few steps toward a small group of guests, intimidating them with his mere presence. Dolan crouched to retrieve the folder, glancing at the contents with mounting distress. "This is extortion," he managed to say. Eye Patch shrugged. "Call it what you like. You've got until tomorrow to make it official." The threat was clear: sign over the property or face the consequences. With each passing second, Evelyn's instincts screamed at her to intervene. But she needed the right moment. If she rushed in without a plan, she'd risk sparking violence in a lobby full of onlookers. Instead, she slowly eased toward a side corridor, her peripheral vision locked on the bikers. She caught a glimpse of Greg, stationed near the front doors, trying to maintain his composure. One of the guests made the mistake of stepping forward, perhaps to defend Dolan. The female biker reached for her holster, her lips curling into a warning snarl. "Don't!" she hissed. Evelyn felt her heart pound in her ears. This was a powder keg waiting for a spark. She scanned the environment for any advantage: chairs, decorative plants, even the angle of the nearest pillar. If gunfire broke out, she needed to ensure guests had a clear path to safety. Tension thickened the air, each second dragging out like an eternity. Finally, Eye Patch turned on his heel, motioning for his companions to follow. "Tomorrow," he repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a death sentence. The trio stomped out of the lobby and the roar of their motorcycles filled the morning silence. In the aftermath, Dolan slumped against the reception desk, visibly shaken. Guests murmured among themselves, some already pulling out phones to check out or find a safer hotel. Evelyn exhaled, her pulse still racing. She knew tomorrow's ultimatum changed everything. The Iron Serpents had drawn a line in the sand. My son, and the Graceland would have to prepare for war, whether or not it wanted to. She just hoped they could make it through the night intact. The hours following the bikers' dawn visit felt like the final calm before a hurricane. Word spread quickly through the staff and the remaining guests. The Iron Serpents wanted ownership papers signed by the next day, or else. A handful of travelers checked out immediately, unwilling to risk their safety in a mounting gang dispute. Others, particularly those who had no immediate alternatives, decided to stay, but they kept their doors locked and their spirits guarded. Dolan called a staff meeting in the early afternoon, gathering everyone from housekeepers to maintenance workers in the modest banquet room. His face was ashen as he explained the situation. "They're giving us until tomorrow. If I sign, the hotel changes hands and we'll all be out of work. If I don't, who knows what they'll do." A murmur of fear rippled through the employees, some on the verge of tears. Marjorie shot a worried glance at Evelyn, who stood quietly at the back of the room, arms folded. When Dolan finished speaking, the group looked to Evelyn for guidance, as though she had become the unspoken leader. She cleared her throat, her voice firm yet low. "I've been working on a plan to reinforce doors and set up emergency procedures. We're short on time, but we can still do some good. If any of you want to help, meet me in the storage area after this meeting." Eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. A small but dedicated team assembled an hour later. Adam, Marjorie, Greg, and a couple of the braver housekeepers. They helped Evelyn finalize the barricade plans, distributing locks and wedge stops. Marjorie volunteered to lead a quick briefing for the remaining guests, explaining how to react if an evacuation was announced. Greg insisted on manning the main entrance, though Evelyn warned him to prioritize his own safety. Adam grabbed tools and set off to secure the loading dock door, determined to ensure it wouldn't be the weak link in their defense. As dusk approached, Evelyn could feel the collective anxiety intensify. Each slam of a car door or growl of an engine outside drew nervous glances. She and Dolan held a quiet discussion in his office, reviewing whether they had any legal loopholes to stall the Iron Serpents. The absent owners refused to return calls, presumably too intimidated or compromised to intervene. Dolan suggested contacting private security, but the hotel's budget couldn't cover the costs, particularly on such short notice. Evelyn stepped out for a breath of fresh air, slipping into the alley beside the building. The city air was heavy with the scent of hot garbage and exhaust fumes. She gazed at the skyline, trying to quell the knot in her stomach. Memory flashed of desert missions where her unit worked against impossible odds. There, at least, she had backup, resources, and the advantage of being part of an elite squad. Here, she was little more than a phantom from a past life, mustering a ragtag group of hotel employees to face off against a dangerous criminal enterprise. She thought about Romer's email, his warning about infiltration and corruption in the police. She was about to turn back inside when she felt her phone vibrate. Another email from Romer. No new leads on your local cop contact. Watch your back. Could be a raid or a sabotage. Don't be afraid to relocate. A property isn't worth a life. She scowled, reading his last sentence. Perhaps a property wasn't worth a life, but what about the lives dependent on that property? Dolan, Marjorie, Adam, they all needed this place. Abandoning them felt like a betrayal of everything she stood for. Pocketing her phone, Evelyn steeled herself for whatever the next 24 hours might bring. As she re-entered the Graceland, she couldn't help but notice the hushed corridors and the drawn faces of those passing by. The countdown had begun. In less than a day, the Iron Serpents would return with an ultimatum. And unless a miracle intervened, a battle for the Graceland's future seemed inevitable. Evelyn just hoped that her makeshift defenses and the courage of ordinary people would be enough to face whatever storm arrived at their doorstep. The morning of the ultimatum arrived with an eerie stillness. While New York City typically greeted dawn with honking cabs and bustling sidewalks, it seemed that on this particular day, the Graceland Hotel existed in a pocket of tense quiet. The staff moved about with subdued efficiency, their eyes constantly flitting to the windows or the doors, waiting for the roar of motorcycle engines. A few guests who had decided to remain peered anxiously from behind curtains, exchanging uneasy glances whenever a vehicle rumbled past. Even the coffee in the hotel lounge tasted bitter with apprehension, as if mirroring the collective mood. Evelyn Carter had spent the night bouncing between monitoring the security cameras, double-checking newly reinforced doors, and catching snippets of restless sleep in a chair at the end of the second-floor corridor. She wore her usual maid's uniform, which felt almost surreal given the looming possibility of combat. Each time she dozed off, images of her Delta Force days flickered through her dreams. Desert raids under moonlight, the rasp of static-laced radio communications, and the muffled adrenaline that came from preparing to strike. Now those memories were no longer confined to her subconscious. They were dangerously close to manifesting in real life. Mr. Dolan emerged from his office shortly after sunrise, shoulders sagging as though he carried an invisible weight. He'd barely slept, if at all. Clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee, he gazed around the lobby, which held only a few remaining guests. Adam stood behind the reception desk, doing his best to exude calm professionalism, but his worried eyes betrayed him. Marjorie paced near the elevators, a clipboard clutched in one hand, ready to coordinate an evacuation if things turned dire. Greg, stationed by the main doors, wore his doorman's uniform with an unusual level of gravitas, as if acknowledging he might need to do far more than open and close doors today. By 8 o'clock, a light drizzle began to fall outside, the gray sky matching the collective apprehension within the Graceland. Evelyn used the lull to make rounds on each floor, checking in with the few brave guests who chose to stay, some because they had no place else to go, others out of stubborn loyalty to the affordable comfort the Graceland provided. She offered them quiet reassurances, speaking in measured tones about a possible building-wide inspection or maintenance update that might occur later in the day, a gentle code for them to stay vigilant in case of sudden trouble. With each hushed conversation, she felt the burden of responsibility grow heavier. These people were under her protection now, whether they realized it or not. She recalled Romer's caution that a property wasn't worth a life. Yet it wasn't just a property on the line. It was a community of vulnerable individuals who had come to rely on this unremarkable hotel as a sanctuary. Slowly, she made her way back down to the lobby, passing framed pictures of the Graceland from decades ago, back when it boasted an elegant facade and marble floors. The building's faded grandeur stood as a testament to perseverance, much like the staff who refused to abandon it. Shortly before 9, Dolan summoned her to his office for a final review of the plan. Together, they huddled over the wrinkled building schematic, tracing the potential choke points and escape routes. If they show up in small numbers, we can try negotiating, or at least buy some time, Evelyn whispered, pointing at the loading dock. But if they come with a larger crew, we'll need to rely on the barricades and get everyone out through the basement exit. Dolan swallowed hard, nodding. Outside, the drizzle intensified, as though the sky itself sensed a storm was imminent. The clock ticked forward, each minute a step closer to whatever fate the day held for them all. By mid-morning, the Gracelands' front doors had opened and closed dozens of times, each slight movement sending a ripple of tension through the staff. A handful of departing guests rolled their suitcases across the worn carpets, clearly not wanting to risk staying any longer. Their faces were etched with apology and fear. Nobody blamed them for prioritizing their safety. The few who remained were mostly business travelers with no easy alternative lodging, or those who had grown fond of the Graceland's peculiar charm and felt inexplicably loyal to it. Despite her best efforts to remain inconspicuous, Evelyn noticed that more of the staff were looking to her for signals. The slightest flicker in her expression could send them into panic or offer them comfort. She tried to keep her posture steady and her tone composed, especially when she passed by coworkers in the halls. Inside, her nerves thrummed like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap at the faintest provocation. After all, Delta Force training might prepare you for combat in foreign lands, but defending a civilian hotel in the heart of New York against a criminal gang wasn't a standard exercise. The gloom outside cast long shadows across the lobby, heightening the sensation that they were perched on a threshold between routine and disaster. Marjorie stood near the reception desk, triple-checking that the emergency phone lines worked properly. Adam busied himself with organizing checkout paperwork, glancing up every few seconds to peer through the glass doors. Greg occasionally opened an umbrella for a departing guest, but his gaze never fully left the street. Dolan alternated between pacing behind the desk and disappearing into his office, where he presumably tried to contact the hotel's absentee owners for a final time. Of course, each call went straight to voicemail. A tense air settled among them, so thick you could almost taste it. Evelyn found herself near a potted fern at the edge of the lobby, studying the foot traffic on the sidewalk outside. Manhattan's usual crowds hurried by, heads bowed under umbrellas, oblivious to the invisible standoff unfolding within the Gracelands' walls. For a fleeting moment, she envied their unawareness. She wished she could be just another passerby, concerned only with a wet commute or the next coffee shop stop. But she had a duty here, and more than that, a gnawing sense of moral imperative. At around 10:30, an unmarked black SUV slowly glided to a stop across the street. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She recognized it from her nocturnal observations, a vehicle that had lingered more than once near the hotel. The tinted windows revealed nothing, but she could almost feel the hostile eyes surveying them. Dolan must have spotted it too, because he appeared beside her, whispering, "You think that's them?" Evelyn shrugged, keeping her voice low. "It could be. Let's wait and see." 5 minutes passed in a nerve-wracking silence before the SUV pulled away. Whether it was a scouting run or a harbinger of worse things to come, no one could say. Yet even this minor incident reminded them that the Iron Serpents were close, perhaps just waiting for the perfect moment. As the clock edged closer to noon, Evelyn realized that every second was a gamble. The bikers could burst in at any time. Without a word, she drifted toward the side corridor leading to the security room, determined to keep a closer eye on the cameras. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was the last semblance of calm they'd know for the rest of the day. Shortly before noon, the ding of the front doors sliding open drew everyone's attention like a gunshot. A tall figure entered, shaking off rainwater from a dark trench coat. At first glance, he didn't resemble the usual bikers who'd shown up before. No leather vest, no brazen patches, no visible tattoos that marked him as an Iron Serpent. Cautious but curious, Dolan approached him. "Good morning," he said in a voice tight with apprehension. "Can I help you?" The stranger looked around, his face betraying mild curiosity at the hotel's modest decor. Then he reached inside his coat, and Evelyn instinctively tensed, ready to move if he withdrew a weapon. Instead, he produced a business card and handed it to Dolan. "My name's Lasky," he announced, voice calm but firm. I'm looking for the manager. At the mention of that name, Evelyn felt her stomach drop. This could only be the retired cop Romer had warned about, the one rumored to assist the Iron Serpents from behind the scenes. Dolan glanced at the card, then back at Lasky with a guarded expression. I'm the manager, he replied. What's this about? The man offered a thin smile. I represent certain interests that have a stake in this property. I've come to see if there's a way to resolve things without any unpleasantness. His eyes flickered around the lobby, noting the subdued staff, the near-empty lounge, and the tension that clung like humidity. Evelyn hovered in the background, pretending to adjust a decorative vase on a side table. Her instincts told her that Lasky, though outwardly polite, could be more dangerous than the loud, aggressive bikers. He had the veneer of authority, possibly some police training, and a veneer of civility that made him unpredictable. She inched closer, ready to intervene if Lasky made a move toward Dolan. For his part, Dolan tried to maintain professionalism. I've been dealing with your interests for a while now, he said, voice trembling slightly. They've made their intentions pretty clear. If you have an alternative proposition, I'm listening. Lasky nodded, removing his rain-speckled hat. Let's not mince words. The Iron Serpents have an offer on the table. You sign over controlling rights, and everyone walks away with minimal fuss. The property changes hands, you get a small compensation, and your staff can seek employment elsewhere. His polite tone couldn't conceal the threat underlying the message. Watching from a safe distance, Evelyn noticed the way Lasky's gaze flicked to her momentarily, as if acknowledging her presence. She forced herself not to react, focusing instead on memorizing every detail about him, his posture, the subtle bulge in his coat pocket that might indicate a concealed firearm, the slight rasp in his voice that suggested years of cigarette smoke. Dolan, pale but determined, shook his head. That offer is a hostile takeover, he countered. I won't be party to extortion. Lasky sighed as if disappointed. That's unfortunate, because my associates are prepared to escalate this situation if necessary. He reached into another pocket and retrieved a folded document, sliding it across the reception desk. Look it over. You have until the end of the day. I'd strongly advise you to make the prudent choice. Without waiting for a reply, he placed his hat back on, turned on his heel, and strode out into the rain. The entire exchange lasted fewer than 5 minutes, yet it left the lobby crackling with tension. Dolan lifted the folded paper with trembling hands. They're not even bothering to hide it anymore, he whispered. Adam, eyes wide, ventured from behind the desk. What do we do now? Dolan glanced at Evelyn, who had come to stand beside him. We hold our ground, she said softly, adrenaline spiking through her veins, and we get ready, because this is only the beginning. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance as if punctuating her words. Lasky's appearance ignited a collective resolve among the Graceland's employees. Any lingering illusions that the Iron Serpents might back down evaporated the instant he declared their intention to escalate. Dolan convened a staff meeting in the banquet room, the same improvised war room they had used before, but this time the atmosphere was more charged. People spoke in urgent voices, some trembling with fear, others with anger. No one was naive enough to believe calm negotiations would prevail. Evelyn stood near the front, gazing at the circle of anxious faces. Adam, Marjorie, Greg, the night cook, a couple of housekeepers, a handful of maintenance workers. Not a single professional fighter among them, just regular people thrust into a situation they never asked for. Yet the determination in their eyes told her they were ready to defend their livelihoods. She cleared her throat, a wave of old leadership instincts surging forward. We don't know exactly when they'll show up, she began, her voice measured. But based on Lasky's words, it'll likely be later today. We must be prepared for them to come in force. The staff leaned in. Marjorie raised her hand. What about the guests who are still here? Some are elderly, others have children. Should we ask them to leave? Evelyn pursed her lips. Ideally, yes, but some might refuse to go or they might have nowhere else to stay. We can't force them out, so we have to be ready to guide them to safety if things escalate. She gestured toward Adam, who held a clipboard. He'll coordinate the evacuation if it comes to that. Listen for the code phrase. We have an issue on floor 2. That's your signal to usher guests to designated safe zones. A murmur swept through the group, a mixture of relief at having a plan and dread at the possibility of enacting it. Greg patted the baton he'd taken to carrying, a simple measure of self-defense for someone who had once only needed a smile and a tip jar. The maintenance workers compared notes on how quickly they could seal off certain corridors. The night cook, a burly man named Francis, even mentioned he had a baseball bat in his locker. "Just in case we need it," he mumbled. Dolan stepped forward, rubbing his eyes. "I appreciate everything you're doing," he told them, his tone wavering. "I never wanted it to come to this. I tried contacting the owners again. Nothing. And the police?" He hesitated, glancing at Evelyn, who knew exactly why. If Lasky had connections in the precinct, involving the police could be a trap. "Well, we'll do what we can," he finished lamely. Sensing the group's wavering morale, Evelyn took a step toward them. "Listen, I know we're not soldiers," she acknowledged, and letting her calm gaze sweep the room. "But we have something those thugs don't. Unity. We care about each other, and we know this place inside and out. That's our advantage. If we keep our wits about us and look out for one another, we stand a chance of making it through." She paused, letting her words sink in. The staff seemed to draw a collective breath, as though absorbing a jolt of courage. Before they broke up, Marjorie asked the question on everyone's mind. "What if it gets violent?" Evelyn chose her words carefully, aware that admitting that she was willing to fight could incite panic. "We'll try to de-escalate, but if they bring force, we may have no choice but to protect ourselves. Stay together, follow the plan, and if someone tells you to run, you run. Don't be a hero." With that, the meeting concluded. People dispersed, each with an assigned task, checking supplies, confirming locks, prepping guests for a possible emergency. Evelyn lingered behind, her heart heavy. She glanced at Dolan, who gave her a weary smile. "You're doing more for us than I ever could," he murmured. "Just keep believing we can pull this off," she replied softly, inwardly hoping she was right. Outside, the rain battered the windows, a grim reminder that time was running short. Following the meeting, an uneasy hush fell over the Graceland. Despite the rain and the tension, afternoon check-ins and check-outs proceeded with surprising normalcy. A few travelers, oblivious to the undercurrent of fear, arrived at the reception desk, asking about local tourist attractions or the best way to hail a cab. Adam managed to maintain his polite clerk persona, though sweat beaded at his brow each time the door slid open. Marjorie did her best to keep smiles in place as she handed out room keys, while Greg discreetly scanned each newcomer for signs of hidden weaponry or gang affiliations. Meanwhile, Evelyn moved like a ghost through the corridors and stairwells, confirming that her earlier reinforcements held steady. She tested the locks on the loading dock door, satisfied with how tightly they'd been installed. She peeked into the laundry room, where she and Adam had stashed some makeshift weapons, wooden broom handles that had been sharpened at one end, along with a small collection of metal pipes. The sight was both grim and comforting. She hoped they'd never need to use them, but it was better than facing armed criminals empty-handed. Hours dragged on, each minute feeling both agonizingly slow and alarmingly fast. On one hand, Evelyn dreaded the moment the iron serpents would return. On the other, each delay gave them more time to prepare. Around mid-afternoon, she stationed herself in a hidden alcove near the lobby, where a small security monitor relayed footage from the hotel's aging camera system. The resolution was poor, and occasionally the screens flickered with static, but it was enough to keep tabs on the street outside, the hallways, and the loading dock entrance. She noticed cars passing, pedestrians hurrying under umbrellas, but no sign of the bikers. Yet. Outside, the rain steadily worsened, drenching the asphalt and turning gutters into miniature rivers. Thunder rumbled intermittently, accompanied by jagged forks of lightning in the distance. The foul weather lent the day a cinematic air, as though nature itself was bracing for an impending showdown. Evelyn's muscles tensed involuntarily each time the camera caught a flash of headlights or a silhouette that even vaguely resembled a biker's form. She occasionally glanced at her phone, hoping for a last-minute update from her old Delta Force contact roamer. Nothing. The silence weighed on her. Maybe he had nothing more to share, or maybe her message had been intercepted. She forced herself not to dwell on worst-case scenarios, focusing instead on what she could control. the Graceland's defenses in the safety of its occupants. Around 5 o'clock, Dolan approached her alcove. Dark rings circled his eyes, and the lines of his face seemed etched deeper than they had been just that morning. "Any sign yet?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Nothing. It's too quiet." He sighed, leaning against the wall. "I feel like my heart's going to explode. If they don't come tonight, are we free? Or does this just start all over again tomorrow?" Evelyn hesitated before answering. "We're never fully free until they back off for good, or until they're dealt with by the law. But let's not think that far ahead. One crisis at a time." A flicker on the security monitor caught her eye, a large shape moving in the shadows near the alley. Adrenaline surged through her veins. She leaned forward, trying to make sense of the grainy image. It could have been a stray cat or a homeless person seeking shelter from the rain. Still, she took no chances, tapping the earpiece she used to communicate with Adam. "Check the alley," she whispered. "Could be nothing, but stay alert." Dolan swallowed hard, following her gaze. The tension ratcheted even higher as they waited to see if the shadows would materialize into something far more menacing. At approximately 6:30, a frantic call crackled over the makeshift intercom system Adam had set up. "Evelyn, they're at the loading dock." The urgency in his voice sent a spike of alarm through her. She sprang from her alcove, motioning for Dolan to stay put in the lobby. Adrenaline flooded her system as she tore down a side corridor and descended a narrow flight of stairs leading to the back of the hotel, heart pounding in her ears. The loading dock was dimly lit by a single flickering overhead bulb. She arrived to find Adam crouched behind a stack of laundry crates, panic etched on his face. He pointed toward the heavy metal door that opened to the outside. Its bottom edge was rattling violently, as though someone was trying to pry it open. Without a word, Evelyn signaled him to stay low. They moved closer, pressing their backs against a concrete wall near the doorway. The grating screech of metal on metal filled the humid space. Whoever was on the other side was armed with tools, possibly crowbars or bolt cutters. Evelyn motioned for Adam to inch back, positioning herself near a vertical pipe that ran floor to ceiling. She remembered her training. In a close-quarters confrontation, leverage was key. She flexed her fingers, heart hammering. For the first time in years, she was about to engage in direct combat. She prayed her skill hadn't rusted along with her old uniform. Suddenly, the door gave a jarring clang and cracked open a few inches, water dripping from the edges where rain splashed in. Through the gap, she could see at least two figures struggling to widen the opening. The door's reinforcements were holding but slowly giving way under relentless prying. She caught a glimpse of a black leather sleeve bearing the iron serpent's patch. Her jaw tightened. This was it. In a single swift motion, she grabbed the heavy laundry cart beside her and shoved it toward the door. It slammed into the intruders, knocking one backward with a startled curse. Through the gap, lightning flashed, illuminating a pair of furious faces. "Someone's in here," one of them shouted. They redoubled their efforts, pushing against the cart. Adam scrambled to help Evelyn brace it. For a moment, the deadlock held, but the bikers began striking the cart with a metallic object, likely a crowbar, sending echoes of steel reverberating through the dock area. Evelyn locked eyes with Adam. "Go alert the others," she hissed. "I'll hold them off." He hesitated, fear stark in his gaze. "But," she cut him off. "Now!" The harshness in her whisper jolted him into action. He bolted up the stairs, footsteps echoing. Alone, she took a deep breath and repositioned her weight. The bikers managed to wrench the door open another inch, sending a gust of cold, rain-soaked air inside. One of them thrust an arm through the gap, trying to shove the cart aside. Evelyn reacted instantly, slamming the edge of the cart against the intruder's arm. He yelped, withdrawing it. "We know you're in there, you idiot!" another voice snarled. Despite the tension, Evelyn almost smirked. Idiot, indeed. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Her arms strained under the effort of keeping the makeshift barrier in place. Every second felt like an eternity, and she knew she couldn't hold out indefinitely. Her eyes darted around for an alternative plan. Stacked against one wall, she saw a cluster of large boxes, housekeeping supplies. If she could wedge them against the cart, it might buy her another minute. Gritting her teeth, she shifted her stance and momentarily released pressure on the cart, lunging to topple the boxes over. It took all her strength and a sudden burst of adrenaline to knock them down, creating an impromptu barricade. The heavy crates tumbled, slamming into the cart with a resonant crash. The door wedged shut once more. Outside, one of the bikers bellowed in frustration, followed by renewed pounding. She heard them cursing, presumably recalculating their approach. Another lightning flash lit up the darkness, followed by a deafening roll of thunder. Evelyn felt the vibration in her chest, as though the storm itself were reflecting her own chaotic heartbeat. For the moment, the door held, but the iron serpents were stubborn, and she knew reinforcements would soon arrive. If not from their side, then from within the hotel. She braced herself for the next surge, adrenaline singing in her veins. The battle for the Graceland had officially begun. As Adam dashed upstairs to summon help, chaos erupted on multiple fronts. The Iron Serpents had apparently split into at least two groups. While one team assaulted the loading dock, another slipped through a partially secured side entrance near the hotel's lobby. The sudden infiltration caught several staff members off guard. A high-pitched scream echoed through the corridor, followed by a startled shout from Greg, who was manning the main entrance. Marjorie, who had been near the front desk, watched in horror as three bikers strode in. Their soaked leather jackets dripped water onto the floor, but that did nothing to dampen the fire in their eyes. One carried a menacing steel pipe, another had a machete strapped at his waist, and the third, a hulking brute, cracked his knuckles ominously. Guests in the lobby shrank back, some pressing against walls, others turning to flee upstairs. Seizing her clipboard as if it were a shield, Marjorie tried to maintain composure. "You can't be in here," she declared, her voice quavering. The man with the steel pipe sneered. "We can be wherever we want. Where's Dolan?" he demanded, his voice carrying a rough edge that matched the storm raging outside. Greg positioned himself between the bikers and the reception desk, brandishing his baton. The hulking brute stepped forward, casually knocking the baton aside before shoving Greg to the ground with a single brutish push. Seeing Greg sprawled on the floor, Marjorie's courage faltered. She glanced around for someone, anyone, to help. Adam burst into the lobby at that moment, breathless from his sprint up the stairs. He locked eyes with her and realized immediately what was happening. "They're at the loading dock too," he shouted, voice cracking. "Evelyn's holding them off, but we need help." The machete-wielding biker grinned at the mention of Evelyn. "So the maid's playing hero, huh? Let's see how tough she is." Before he could turn and head for the back corridors, Dolan emerged from his office, face pale. "Enough!" the manager yelled. His voice was shaky, but loud enough to draw their attention. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" The hulking brute answered by reaching over the reception desk and grabbing Dolan by the collar. "We want what's ours," he growled. "Sign the papers, old man, or we'll tear this place apart." Behind him, the steel pipe biker advanced on Adam and Marjorie, causing them to step back. Fear pounded in Adam's chest, but he remembered the plan. In a trembling voice, he spoke into the intercom on the desk. "We have an issue on floor 2. We have an issue on floor 2. It was the code phrase for evacuation, a signal for staff and guests to either retreat to safe zones or flee if possible. At once, confusion and alarm spread. Guests who had been holed up in their rooms started emerging, some lugging suitcases, others clutching children's hands. Marjorie gestured frantically for them to move toward the stairwell that led to the basement exit. The pipe-wielding biker noticed this mass movement and shouted, "Hey, nobody leaves until we get the manager's signature." Chaos reigned as frightened guests surged in multiple directions. In the midst of it all, Greg pulled himself up, wiping blood from his lip. He spotted a second group of bikers entering from the adjacent hallway, shoving aside a petrified Maid and kicking open a storage closet door. The storm outside raged with renewed fury, the flash of lightning illuminating the scene like a strobe light. Thunder boomed overhead, almost drowning out the shouts and screams. Somewhere beyond the melee, Evelyn was still fending off the assault at the loading dock. Dolan gasped for air, caught in the brute's iron grip. Adam looked frantically for a phone or any means to get real law enforcement involved, though Lasky's rumored corruption loomed in the back of his mind. The Graceland, normally so placid, had become a battleground. At that moment, it seemed the Iron Serpents held every advantage: numbers, weapons, and the willingness to unleash violence. Yet amid the panic, a spark of defiance flared in the hearts of the staff and guests alike. They'd come too far to surrender now. Downstairs, Evelyn's arms burned with exertion as she braced the makeshift barricade against the unrelenting pounding from outside. In the flicker of the overhead light, she could see the metal door bending slightly from repeated crowbar strikes. Her barricade was holding for now, but the strain was evident. Then, in a heartbeat, the pounding stopped. She held her breath, uncertain if the bikers had given up or if they were plotting another tactic. Water dripped from the threshold, forming a small puddle on the floor. The wet hush pressed in on her ears, punctuated by the distant rumble of thunder. She slowly released her pressure on the cart and crates, muscles protesting after minutes of tension. Then came a voice from outside. "Split up! We'll find another way in." A cold rush of realization struck her. They were leaving to join their fellow gang members inside the hotel or circling around to test a different entry. She scrambled over the toppled boxes, ignoring the ache in her arms. Racing up the narrow staircase, she emerged into the corridor that led to the lobby, braced for an immediate attack. Instead, she found the hallway empty, though the air carried muffled shouts, suggesting the fight had moved deeper into the hotel. She clutched the sharpened end of a broomstick she had grabbed en route, keeping it close to her side. It was crude compared to the sophisticated firearms she'd once trained with, but desperation made any weapon valuable. Moving swiftly but cautiously, she peered around a corner and witnessed pandemonium in the lobby. Guests were scattering toward the stairwells, many clutching bags or ushering frightened children. She spotted Dolan pinned against the reception desk by a towering biker, while Adam tried in vain to pull the assailant away. A second biker swung a metal pipe wildly, smashing a nearby potted plant and sending shards of ceramic across the floor. Marjorie was shepherding a group of terrified guests toward the safety of the basement exit, but the path was blocked by another armed biker. With practiced focus, Evelyn dropped into a crouch and advanced. She headed first toward the nearest threat, the biker swinging the pipe. He hadn't seen her yet, his attention fixed on intimidating the guests. Closing the gap in a heartbeat, she whirled the broomstick around and jabbed the blunt end into the man's calf. He howled in pain, stumbling forward. Before he could recover, she slammed the sharpened end into the side of his knee, not with lethal force, but enough to buckle the joint. His leg gave out, and he collapsed with a crash, cursing in agony. The sudden commotion drew the tall brute's attention away from Dolan. He spun around just as Evelyn yanked the pipe from the fallen biker's grasp. "You!" he snarled, eyes flaring with rage. Dolan crumpled to the floor, gasping for breath as the brute lunged at her. Evelyn pivoted sideways, parrying his lunge with the pipe, then stepped inside his guard to deliver a sharp elbow strike to his ribs. It stunned him for a second, enough time for Adam to rush forward and drag Dolan away from the fray. In that second, Evelyn locked eyes with the hulking man. She saw raw surprise flicker across his features, surprise that this unassuming maid wielded skill and speed far exceeding what he'd expected. He recovered, swinging a massive fist that brushed her cheek in a near miss. Evelyn ducked under the blow and countered with a strike aimed at his solar plexus. Though it landed with precision, he was large enough to absorb most of the impact, staggering but not falling. Panting from exertion, Evelyn squared off, gripping the pipe tightly. Rain-slicked wind gusted in through the open doors, and thunder growled overhead like a cosmic drum roll. She sensed that the entire room's eyes were on them. Staff, guests, even the other bikers who briefly paused their chaos to watch. At that moment, she felt the rush of old instincts, the reflexes honed by thousands of hours of training. The iron serpents might have come expecting easy prey, but they just discovered their miscalculation. She steeled herself for whatever came next. The hulking biker clenched his fists and lunged again, determined to overwhelm Evelyn with raw power. She sidestepped, hooking her pipe against his forearm in a deflecting motion. He grunted, forced to stagger backward to keep his balance. Across the lobby, guests continued to flee, and staff members hurried them along. In the corner of her vision, Evelyn noticed Marjorie ushering a cluster of trembling tourists toward the basement exit, while Greg guided others up the stairs to find shelter in locked rooms. With the pipe-wielding thug still writhing on the floor, the hulking brute was the main threat. He bellowed curses, spit flying from his mouth, as he tried to corner her against a row of plush chairs. Evelyn kept her distance, forcing him to overextend. A flash of lightning illuminated the hotel, revealing beads of sweat rolling down his temple. She feigned a strike to the left. He moved to block, exposing his right side. Instantly, she pivoted and slammed the pipe into his kidney area. He roared in pain, nearly dropping to one knee. Before she could press the advantage, a new assailant burst in from the corridor, a biker with a machete strapped to his belt. Spotting Evelyn engaged with his comrade, he drew the blade with a scraping sound of metal. Evelyn's adrenaline spiked anew. She swiftly assessed her options. Keep focusing on the hulking biker and risk being blindsided by the machete, or confront the new threat head-on. In a split second, she decided the machete was the bigger danger. Taking two quick strides away from the brute, she braced for the new adversary's attack. The machete-wielding biker sneered. "You really think you can stop me with that little pipe, sweetheart?" he taunted. Evelyn said nothing, adopting a balanced stance. She recalled her close-quarters combat drills. Distract, disarm, disable. The machete gleamed under the flickering lobby lights, droplets of rainwater sliding along its length. In a heartbeat, he lunged. She responded in kind, parrying the blade with the metal pipe. Sparks flew and the impact sent a jolt up her arms. He snarled and swung again, a diagonal slash aimed at her torso. Evelyn stepped inside his guard, blocking with the pipe and forcing his arm upward. The brute, still nursing injuries, tried to seize an opening. He lurched forward, intent on grabbing Evelyn from behind. Yet in that instant, Adam reappeared, armed with a sharpened broomstick of his own. With shaky resolve, he jabbed it into the brute's shoulder. The biker roared, swinging wildly at Adam. Though Adam jumped back in alarm, his action bought Evelyn a crucial second. Seizing the moment, Evelyn twisted the machete wielder's wrist, using leverage to pry the blade free. The weapon clattered to the floor. Without hesitation, she struck him in the solar plexus with her elbow, then swept his leg, sending him crashing down. The hulking brute, distracted by Adam's attack, received a swift kick to the back of his knee from Evelyn, buckling him for good. In a flurry of movement, she snatched the machete and slid it out of reach with her foot, leaving both bikers groaning on the floor. For a heartbeat, an awed silence settled over the lobby. Guests who hadn't yet escaped gaped at the unlikely scene. A hotel maid and a timid clerk outmaneuvering two hardened gang members. Adam, breathing heavily, nodded at Evelyn, a flicker of astonishment on his face. She gave him a brief smile of gratitude. "Thanks," she mouthed. He swallowed, returning the nod, though fear and adrenaline still danced in his eyes. Dolan, regaining his footing, offered a look of sheer disbelief. How did you—" he stammered. But there was no time for explanations. Alarms sounded from deeper in the hotel, and from outside came the roar of additional motorcycles. Reinforcements, Evelyn realized. They had to secure this part of the building and regroup. "Get everyone to safe zones," she ordered. "I'll hold them back as long as I can." The staff sprang into action, spurred by the display of defiance. As thunder rumbled again, Evelyn pressed forward, ready to meet whatever new threat surged through the Graceland's doors. The Graceland reverberated with clashing echoes, shouts, crashing furniture, and the relentless roar of the storm outside. Evelyn hurried down a side corridor toward the security room. Intent on checking the cameras for any new points of infiltration, turning a corner, she nearly collided with a breathless Marjorie. "The guests are safe in the basement," Marjorie gasped. "But there are more bikers upstairs, near the banquet room. Francis, he's trying to hold them off." Evelyn nodded grimly, conscious that every second mattered. "Stay here. Help guide anyone who's lost," she instructed, then darted past Marjorie, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Halfway to the staircase, her phone vibrated. Panting, she ducked into a shallow alcove to check the screen. An email from Romer. "Just got word. Several Iron Serpent's vehicles spotted heading your way. Police cruiser might be on the scene. Unclear if it's compromised or legit. Stay sharp. ETA minutes." Evelyn cursed under her breath. The cavalry of criminals was about to multiply, and the potential involvement of a police cruiser, one that might be under Lasky's sway, further complicated matters. She bolted up the stairs, nearly slipping on the wet steps, likely tracked in by the bikers. Upon reaching the second-floor landing, she heard the echo of muffled scuffling. Creeping forward, she spotted Francis, the night cook, wielding his baseball bat against two bikers who'd cornered him near the banquet room entrance. He swung wildly, managing to keep them at bay for the moment, but it was evident he was tiring. One of the bikers brandished a switchblade, the other a length of heavy chain. Surveying the hallway, Evelyn noticed a half-open maintenance closet. An idea formed. She crept closer, using the corridor's shadows to stay out of sight. Francis landed a lucky hit on the chain wielder's forearm, forcing the thug to drop his weapon with a pained yelp. The switchblade biker cursed and lunged, slashing at Francis's leg. The cook stumbled, letting out a guttural cry. Seeing her opening, Evelyn dashed from her hiding spot. She seized the door of the maintenance closet and yanked it off its stopper, then slammed it with all her might against the unsuspecting switchblade biker. He reeled backward, smashing into the opposite wall. Startled, the chain wielder turned just in time to catch a blow from Francis's bat across his midsection. Evelyn followed through by sweeping the chain off the floor and flinging it down the corridor, out of easy reach. Both bikers fell to their knees, winded and disoriented. Francis bent over, clutching his injured thigh, sweat beading his brow. Evelyn placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked, voice taut with urgency. He nodded, though pain was etched on his features. They had no time to celebrate. The pounding of footsteps on the stairwell signaled more reinforcements. "Help me get them in here," Evelyn hissed, jerking her head toward the banquet room. Francis glanced at her like she was crazy, but complied. Together, they dragged the two dazed bikers into the banquet room, a space normally reserved for small conventions or wedding receptions. Rows of foldable chairs and long tables were scattered about. Evelyn and Francis shoved the bikers behind a stack of chairs, effectively blocking them from rejoining the fight anytime soon. Now breathing hard, Evelyn scanned the scene. The second floor was momentarily clear, but she could hear fresh yells echoing from below. "We should barricade the stairs," she advised Francis. He nodded, his voice ragged. "I'll manage." Before she could protest, he limped off, determined to find something, anything, to block the stairwell door. The faint blare of sirens filtered through the crashing thunder outside, leaving Evelyn uncertain whether to feel relief or worry. If the police were compromised, they might be here to aid the bikers. If they weren't, maybe they'd finally bring an end to this siege. With a shaky breath, she squared her shoulders and headed for the staircase to rejoin the fray below. The night was far from over, but she could sense a turning point looming. Evelyn reached the lobby level just as red and blue lights strobed through the rain-smeared front doors. Shouting erupted outside, followed by a burst of frantic movement within the Graceland. Some bikers glanced around uneasily, evidently unsure if the arriving police were allies or adversaries. Dolan, leaning heavily on Adam for support, looked torn between relief and dread. With the chaos momentarily paused, guests and staff who had not evacuated ducked for cover behind furniture or doorways, unsure of what to expect. The front door slid open, revealing two uniformed officers, drenched by the downpour, stepping in with weapons drawn. "NYPD, drop your weapons," barked one of the officers, a stocky woman with water dripping off her cap. The second officer, tall and lean, scanned the lobby, taking in the trashed furniture, shattered ceramics, and moaning bikers on the floor. A tense hush settled as the iron serpents hesitated, some lowering their weapons, others clutching them more tightly. Then, as if on cue, Lasky strode in behind the officers, the brim of his hat casting a shadow across his eyes. His presence immediately set Evelyn's nerves on edge. He gave a curt nod to the cops. "Stand down," he ordered, voice dripping with authority. The stocky female officer frowned. "Sir, we have reason to believe—" Lasky cut her off with an upraised hand. "I said stand down. This is a private matter, and I'm handling it." Evelyn felt a jolt of anger. Here he was, openly interfering with active police officers, exploiting whatever clout he'd retained from his days on the force. The tall officer glanced at his partner, uncertainty playing across his features. Meanwhile, the bikers exchanged loaded looks, some stepping back as if confident that Lasky had the upper hand. Dolan, trembling with barely suppressed rage, managed to speak. "You have no jurisdiction here. You're retired," he cried, voice echoing in the battered lobby. Lasky's smirk was predatory. "Connections matter more than a badge, especially in this town," he replied, offering the uniformed officers a knowing look. Evelyn realized this was the moment. If she didn't expose him, he might walk them all into further danger. She darted forward, ignoring the immediate protest from some staff. "Officers, don't listen to him," she shouted, voice cutting through the commotion. "He's in league with the Iron Serpents. This is extortion, assault, and God knows what else." Lasky turned a cold glare her way. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he snapped. "You're a maid in a rundown hotel. Keep your mouth shut." But Evelyn stood her ground. "A maid, yes," she fired back, "but one who knows real justice from the sham you are selling." She looked at the tall officer who met her gaze with a flicker of confusion. "Check his records. You'll find he's been working with this gang for months, using his connections to avoid scrutiny. Look around you. This is not a private matter. There are injured people here, terrified guests. This is a criminal invasion." The stocky female officer frowned, eyeing Lasky's defiant posture. "Sir, is this true? We got a call about an armed assault in progress." Lasky shot her a venomous look. "Don't be naive. These people are trespassing on someone else's property. They are the aggressors." He gestured to Dolan. "He's refusing a court order." "There is no court order," Dolan practically screamed, brandishing the crumpled papers Lasky had given him. "This is all forged. They're just forcing me to sign my life away." He tried to hand the documents to the female officer, who glanced over them quickly. Her frown deepened. Slowly, she raised her radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Morales, requesting immediate backup at the Graceland Hotel. Multiple assailants, possible corruption. Over." A ripple of fear shot through the bikers. Some tried to bolt, only to be blocked by more staff emerging from hiding spots. Adam, Marjorie, Greg, even the battered Francis. Evelyn kept her eyes on Lasky, whose composure wavered. He seemed torn between attempting a last stand or abandoning his underlings to the wolves. Through gritted teeth, he muttered, "You're making a mistake, officers. You don't know the bigger picture." Morales ignored him, stepping aside to signal for more units. The tall officer kept his gun trained on the bikers, ignoring Lasky's protests. In the swirl of red and blue light, the battered remains of the Graceland's lobby bore witness to a turning point. Evelyn let out a shaky breath. She sensed that victory was near, but only if they could keep the corrupt ex-cop from twisting the narrative yet again. Thunder boomed overhead, and the storm raged on. But for the first time that night, hope glimmered through the dark. Additional police units arrived within minutes, lights flashing across the drenched pavement outside. A swarm of officers poured into the lobby, swiftly dispersing among the battered corridors to round up any remaining Iron Serpents. The battered bikers who had been subdued, some with bruised faces, others nursing wounded limbs, offered little resistance once they realized legitimate law enforcement had arrived in force. Handcuffs clicked, and the chaotic scene that had engulfed the Graceland began to settle into a tense calm. Lasky, cornered and outnumbered, attempted to pull rank one last time, flashing what appeared to be an old police ID. Officer Morales snatched it from his hand, shaking her head in disgust when she saw it was expired. "Put your hands behind your head," she ordered. His face twisted with rage, but he complied under the watchful aim of several drawn firearms. Adam and Marjorie exchanged trembling smiles as they witnessed the downfall of the man who had so brazenly threatened them. Dolan slumped against the reception desk, tears of relief streaming down his cheeks as he thanked the officers. Amid the swirl of uniforms and flashing lights, Evelyn found herself momentarily overlooked, which suited her just fine. Her arms trembled from the exertion of the night's battles, and bruises were already forming where she had deflected hits. She noticed a paramedic team arriving, carrying first aid bags and stretchers. They tended to Greg's split lip, Francis's leg wound, and the shaken guests who had huddled in the basement. Dolan insisted on giving up his spot for medical attention until everyone else was seen first, a gesture that spoke volumes about his character. When an officer finally approached Evelyn, asking for her statement, she took care to minimize her role. She described the initial break-in at the loading dock, the attempts to protect staff and guests, and the final confrontation, omitting any direct mention of her military background. The officer seemed impressed nonetheless, noting how effectively she had managed to disarm multiple attackers. "You sure you're just a maid?" he asked, half in jest. Evelyn forced a small smile. "I guess you never know what people are capable of when pushed to their limits." Morning arrived, bringing a pale gray dawn that revealed the extent of the damage. Broken glass, scattered debris, and overturned furniture littered the hotel's once quiet halls. Yet the sense of relief was palpable. One by one, the bikers were hauled away, while Lasky was taken into custody under suspicion of conspiracy, extortion, and accessory to assault. As the police cruisers pulled away, Mr. Dolan stood with Adam, Marjorie, and Greg at the hotel entrance, collectively exhaling as if they'd been holding their breath for hours. Evelyn lingered at the edge of the lobby, watching paramedics load the last few injured bikers into an ambulance. Despite the tumult and exhaustion, a subtle warmth filled her chest. She had managed to protect the Graceland, the staff, and the guests, though the cost was a battered hotel, rattled nerves, and a few nights' worth of nightmares ahead. At least no one had died. Dolan and the others approached her, gratitude shining in their eyes. "Evelyn," Dolan began, voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how we can ever thank you. You saved all of us." Adam, sporting a new bandage on his arm, chimed in, "Seriously, I thought we were goners." Marjorie dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "If you ever need anything, you just let us know." She tried to brush it off. "We all did our part," she said softly, eyes roaming the carnage. "Look at what you accomplished together. Barricading doors, guiding guests, calling for help. You didn't just roll over." Greg, gingerly testing his sore shoulder, nodded. "Don't be too modest, kiddo. We saw you in action." As the hours wore on, the cleanup began. Staff members who were still able-bodied moved debris, taped off broken windows, and did their best to restore some semblance of normalcy. Guests who had endured the ordeal were offered alternative accommodations by the authorities. Many thanked Evelyn personally, some still shaking in the aftermath of the night's terror. By noon, the hotel had quieted once again, this time with the uneasy peace of a place that had survived a storm. In the manager's office, Evelyn sat with Dolan, reviewing the damage reports. Insurance claims would be tricky, and the owners would likely have a lot of explaining to do. Still, Dolan's eyes shone with renewed resolve. "We'll rebuild," he said, smiling through his fatigue, "stronger this time." Evelyn nodded, stifling a wince as she shifted in her chair, bruises protesting. She couldn't help but think that stronger applied not just to the building, but to the people who had found the courage to stand up to a criminal gang. She realized that while she might carry the scars of her military past, she'd also brought forth its best qualities: resilience, resourcefulness, and the will to protect those in need. Outside, the sun finally broke through the thinning clouds, a timid light scattering rain droplets into tiny rainbows. Evelyn watched it from the office window, reflecting on how a mere hotel maid, anonymously living in a corner of New York, had faced down the darkness with unexpected allies. She had defended her refuge, and in doing so found a piece of herself she'd thought lost forever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now the Graceland stood intact, a quiet testament to the power of underestimated people who refuse to yield. Looking back on this harrowing chapter in New York's Lower East Side, it's clear that courage and unity can overcome even the most daunting threats. The Graceland Hotel, once an unremarkable place, became a crucible of heroism, revealing the hidden strength in ordinary folks. Our quiet maid, with her secret Delta Force background, led a remarkable stand to defend both the building and the people who called it home. In doing so, she reminded us all that real power lies in unwavering loyalty, community spirit, and a willingness to stand up for what's right. We hope this story inspires you to believe in the resilience of everyday heroes and the power of collective action. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the journey, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your opinions and discuss the tale with you. After all, every story becomes richer when we explore it together.